Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. We're coming to you a couple days late. A little bit of a crazy Sunday, Monday for myself and Kevin as we balance crossover season with KU football and KU basketball going on. But here we are, Tuesday morning, going to talk about Kansas football's 24-20 loss to Arizona in Tucson. Kevin, one of my friends texted me over the weekend, is it Groundhog Day? Because it was a very similar result for Kansas football, falling at the death in a Big 12 game. And it's something that just we've seen so many times with Kansas. Here's how we're going to do the podcast today for those listening. We're going to start. We're talking about the kind of the final 3 minutes of the game, the fourth down decision, and then we'll kind of work our way back through the game because, look, there is no bigger, I think, storyline or discussion point than the way the end of the game was handled from Kansas. So, Kevin, let's just start right here and be honest. What'd you think in real time as it's happening? I don't know. Did the TV broadcast explain what was going on with Jalen? Like, walk me through what kind of your perspective was watching the game live as KU gets this 4th and 2 from the 11-yard line.
No, the broadcast didn't explain it at all. I mean, they explained that, hey, obviously you could see that Jalen was hurt, that, he got removed, but there was no explanation of, hey, the rule says injuries, whatever else. There were some people, myself, I'll be 100% honest with you. I didn't realize that you couldn't put somebody back in off an injury timeout. I thought it was the same as when you lose your helmet, right? Where you can call a timeout, put somebody back in. And so, no, it wasn't explained. And so looking it up after the game, I think we had somebody in our live chat mention, hey, you can't put somebody back in off an injury like that. We looked it up. That was the case. It's one of the reasons, quite frankly, doing a live show is really tough because you don't have time to sit, digest, go through all the details before you do it. But no, they didn't explain that part of it. Hated it in real time. Like, I know with the benefit of hindsight, it's very easy to sit there and say that was a bad decision. I think that we've talked about the Missouri decision, right? And how we didn't like that decision when it happened. 4th and 8, it felt like you weren't going to see the ball back with the way Missouri was running the ball, with the way KU was struggling to get stops. Even so, you brought up your model that showed, hey, it's a hard row to hoe even if you go for it there. To get
against Missouri.
Get the 4th and 8 to continue on and get the game-winning touchdown in that circumstance, it was tough either way. There wasn't a great no doubt answer at that point. It felt like there was a great no doubt answer in this case, and they went the other way. And I'm interested to hear what you thought being there, but I think the few reasons I really didn't like it, one, there was so much time remaining. It feels like this Kansas defense can do okay against the run when they know you have to run. They can do okay against the pass when they know you have to pass. But when both options are available, they really struggle. And there was so much time left that it wasn't like there were 40 seconds left where it's like, okay, Arizona's going to have to throw this ball. We know they're going to have to throw this ball. There are some things that we can do. That was one part of it. Another part of it, obviously, the short distance. It's 2 yards. And whether you have Jalen or not, you should have something with Cole Ballard or Isaiah Marshall where you feel like your offense can get 2 yards in that circumstance. And the third part is Kansas's defense had done a mostly pretty good job. They'd given up some explosives, obviously, and we'll deal with that. But Arizona coming in is a top 25 offense. And so to that point, yes, your defense is playing pretty well. You had gotten stops the previous few drives, but to me, it kind of felt like the dam was going to break at some point, and Arizona's offense was going to put points on the board at some point. Plus, field goal just doesn't give you that much with that much time.
And that's the thing. So I was on the sideline at that point because I'd gone down, I think, 3.5 minutes left. So because I was like, hey, if KU's going to win and bowl eligibility is clinched, like, get on the field, get video, all that stuff. Yeah. If they lose, it'll be good to get a feel for the sideline. And when I saw Marjan come out, I was like, Oh no. Because at the end of the day, if he makes a field goal, it's still a touchdown,
Yeah,
right? And I don't know, just from my just here's my thing. I think so much of it too is about what message you convey to your team,
I agree.
right? If KU goes for it, and this is just like in terms of vibes, pretty much. If you go for it, you are signaling your team, let's go win this freaking game. Let's go get bowl eligibility. Like, that's what you're telling your team by being aggressive, going for it on fourth down. Hey, if we don't get it, defense, we trust you, blah, blah, blah. Kicking the field goal is like a hedge,
Yeah,
right? Where it's like, hey, defense, we're trusting you, but we're gonna give you 3 extra points. So if it's just a touchdown, the messaging that you're giving your team in that moment, just from that perspective, I don't love. And then you can look at the actual numbers and like it's pretty clear cut what what like you should do. And here's my thing too about the whole Jalen Daniels thing, Kevin. I totally get it. Not having your starting quarterback on a crucial 4th and 2 with bowl eligibility on the line, I can understand a little bit why you may be gun shy. My counter to that would be, why the heck are you giving Isaiah Marshall carries earlier in the game then? If you're not going to trust him to go run the ball, or Cole Ballard or whoever in a
sure.
short yardage situation. And look, KU was averaging 3.9 yards a carry in the second half, right? It wasn't like KU was just getting entirely stuffed. There have been some good runs, and KU, I think, has done some really good stuff with like the 6 offensive line, bringing Nolan Gorska into the game, right? There are just so many signs throughout the course of the game where it's like, this is a spot where you should be able to trust your offensive line and your offense, because you've shown that you trust your quarterback, your backup quarterback, or I guess technically third string for Isaiah. You trust him enough to go out there and carry the football earlier in the game. What sort of message does that send to him when the game's on the line and you don't have your starter and you end up taking a much more conservative route that, if you, again, you look at the advanced numbers, the model that this is very, very simple. It's down distance time. And it's got the Vegas spread factored in. So it should factor in, right? KU is the underdog here by about a touchdown, or 5 points, whatever it ended up being. And so I'll walk you through it here. Basically, you go for it. Your win probability is 84%. You attempt a field goal at 76%. If you are successful on your attempt to go for it, your win probability jumps up to 94%. If you fail, it's 72%. If you succeed and you make the field goal, your win probability is 76%. And so what I look at, Kevin, here is I say, if you make the field goal, your win probability is 76%. If you fail the fourth down, it's 72%.
Yep.
Is that big enough of a gap to totally ignore the potential of getting to that 94%? And granted, okay, you could get to 94%. Someone fumbles and Arizona scores in the game, but at the end of the day, playing the numbers here, you're totally ignoring the fact that 94% is on the table. And you're saying, well, you're afraid of the 72% in favor of the 76. Right. And so that for me is where I get into the whole, like, man, the numbers here really do just show you got to go. You got to go. And then, of course, like I said, like the whole mindset, the message that conveys to your team, all of that stuff. Right. I just think it was one of those where it's a no doubt go for it. But I can't say I was surprised by the decision that was made, because we've seen this.
Yeah.
This is how that, they deal with it. And this is how they approach these situations, is taking the, what is perceived as the least risky option.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I do want to ask you this question, though. Put yourself in Jim Zabrowski's shoes here for a minute. It's 4th and 2. Lance says, let's go. Are you going with Cole Ballard or Zeke Marshall? And what's your play call?
That's a good question. Honestly, probably Cole.
Yeah.
More physical.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know, I'm not a scheme guy, but like, I think you can do a couple of things, right? You can try some sort of option if you trust him.
Yep.
That might be a little risky. You can just say, hey, we're going to beat them off the ball and hand it off to Daniel Highshaw, who has routinely found ways to get extra yards by just battling and being a tough SOB,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know? So I think you could put in Cole if you wanted to run like a quarterback, just Cole go run straight forward. You could do that. Maybe wouldn't be the prettiest thing. But I think, considering what Highshaw has shown you since he came back from the injury, I think about K-State, think about the hard yards against Oklahoma State. You think about some of the runs he had against Arizona. Like he has shown you that even when there's not a lot of room, he can go get those extra yards. So that's just
yeah.
how I think about it.
Yeah, I like the idea of using Cole for a few reasons. I think one of them is the guy knows the offense, so I think you don't necessarily have to take something off the table, right?
Mm,
If you wanted to run, we've seen Kansas in short yardage situations run that little RPO where they spill either the tight end or Cam Pickett out to the flat, where
sure. Yeah.
you can run the ball or you can dump the ball off there. That's an option with Cam Pickett. I'm not sure it's as much of an option with Zeke Marshall. At the same time, we've heard, hey, you have this package of plays for Zeke Marshall. He's a really explosive runner. What about like a quarterback draw with sort of that little pop pass element to the tight end just to keep people honest? I mean, I think there are different ways that you can go. I just think it's an interesting discussion to not just say, well, I would have gone for it, but also say, okay, how would you have gone for it? Who
Yeah,
would have been your
sure.
quarterback and what would you have done?
Yeah. And it's one of those too where having two quarterbacks with different rushing skill sets between the two, having Isaiah with his speed and what he could offer you in that situation versus Cole and the power probably that, he could offer. Um, it's just tough. It's one of those situations where you can Monday morning quarterback it all. And if the defense gets a stop, you know, Leipold can look at all of us and say, "You guys are wrong. I made the right call, and we're going bowling." But obviously, the defense doesn't get that stop. And Kevin, to build off of that, what you said a minute ago about the defense and the way that when they know what's coming, they can stop it. Man, watching that drive back on the sideline,
Yeah.
I was like, "Whoa, why is there so much space in the middle of the field?" Well, Trey Lathan a couple times is up on the line of scrimmage, bluffing a blitz, and then he's turning around. His back is to the play,
Yep.
and he's sprinting away to get into to his zone coverage.
That's what he
And
did on the touchdown play.
it's
Like,
on the
that's
touchdown
exactly
play.
what
It's on, I think, the
happened.
Fafita run earlier.
Yeah.
It's a couple times there where it's like, man, like again, it's just one of those where, like you said, when you have the ability to do both, either pass or run, due to the time and due to your timeout situation, it's a tough spot to be in, and it's one that, again, like the Cincinnati game, the faith in the defense to get it done isn't quite there, just because the time, distance, and just that Arizona has the talent on offense to do different things,
Yeah.
right? This isn't a one-dimensional offense, right? They ran the ball halfway decent during the game. Fafita had a couple nice throws. Granted, I think Q did a great job. We'll talk more about that. But
Yeah.
just on the last drive, it was one of those where I kept watching. I'm like, why is the middle of the field so wide open? And obviously, then it ends up killing KU on the touchdown run.
Yeah, I think the 2 explosive runs that they had at the very end, on one of them, it was the same thing that we've talked about when KU's gotten gashed right before
Mm,
halves with runs, where KU had a light box. They had as many guys in the box as Arizona had blockers, and you also have a running back on top of that. So you're outnumbered, and it's tough to stop a run when you're outnumbered. Um, but at the same time, the touchdown run that you talked about, KU had 7 guys at the line of scrimmage, but they were calling a zone blitz. So you had Trey Lathan turning his back to the play. You had Dean Miller vacating the box, I think it was, on the edge. And so really you only had 5 guys, and then you had 2 other guys running away from the play. And so Kansas has shown in these situations where when teams can do both, when they're going to have light boxes, when they're going to be dropping back and playing passive defenses like that, the other teams are able to run the ball. And Arizona had way too much time because there was so much time before that fourth down decision where you get the ball with 2:39 left. In college football, that's an eternity with the clock stopping while they reset the chains after first downs, with all of those things. And so you didn't take anything away. Like I said, I understand going for the field goal if there's 40 seconds left or something like that, where you're taking the run off the table basically, but you weren't. And I think that was one of the things that made that decision really difficult to watch, and the ensuing drive really tough to watch.
Yeah, well, and you think about it too, Kevin. So a couple times this year, right? Missouri, KU needed the defensive stop at the end of the game, didn't get it. Cincinnati needed the defensive stop. The ball just hits Trey Lathan's hands on the interception, and that's a one play. It side tangent. It is wild for Kansas that they are 2 dropped interceptions away from having 7 wins. Crazy. But you look at Missouri, Cincinnati, and then you can look at UCF. And man, UCF moved the ball a little bit before KU's defense finally buckled down a little bit. It was a little nervy there. I remember watching that press box, like, no way there. And then KU was able to get the stop. But it's one of those where it hasn't always looked pretty, right? And then you get into this situation where, okay, KU's kind of 1-2 on those situations. And that's what influenced, I think, just my general feel that like this is not going to go super well. Was just the fact that you looked at the other situations. This defense has been in that spot earlier in the season, and it's not filled you with a ton of confidence.
Yeah. It was one that I'm sure in person and having watched KU this year, there probably wasn't a whole lot of confidence. You felt like it in getting that stop, and I can tell you from watching it, I wasn't super confident that it was. And it stinks too, because I do think that the defense, for the most part, did a really good job in this game, and they were left out there in a really tough situation there at the very end. And it was. I'm trying to. Sorry, I'm looking up when the 2-minute timeout came or whatever.
It was right after. It was right after
it already gotten to like the 40 or so. Yeah. So they had basically 2 minutes to go 60 yards. Mm-hmm. That's most college offenses can do that, and Arizona is significantly better than most offenses on an average Saturday.
Yeah, and man, I think you're totally right about the defense. Like, it was a game where I think you finally saw some consistency.
Yeah.
And it was a little worrisome early in the game, right? Because, KU gets obviously the stop to open the game, and then Arizona goes 78 yards, 8 plays, and it was just like, there's the KU defense we've seen so much this season. But then it goes, right, 3 punts in a row, and then they get the touchdown before the end of the half. We'll talk about that in a second. And then in the second half, right, it's field goal, punt, punt, punt. So like KU's defense, like in terms of consistency, it was the most consistent I think the KU defense has been against a competent offense.
For sure.
And maybe like a little bit of the first quarter against Missouri.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I thought KU's physicality against Missouri, I think, was really underrated, especially that defensive tackle group. Mm-hmm. Like, they really fought and battled against a more talented team in that one. And so, yeah, I would agree with that. I think the other thing that stood out in this one, Swain, was KU played off its front foot defensively. There was aggression. There were blitzes, and I'm not saying they never blitz, but I am saying it felt like KU was playing over its toes a little bit more than it usually does. And a lot of times we've seen, okay, it feels like they're being passive and they're still getting gashed. In this case, it was almost like KU said, well, if we're going to get gashed, like, let's go balls to the wall. And they did get gashed at times. They gave up some explosive plays here and there, but they also generated some explosive plays defensively. When you look at sacks, when you look at turnover-worthy plays, they did that part of it. And I hope, watching Kansas's defense this week, I hope that's something we see going forward, because I think that unless you are Georgia or somebody that has this really high-level college football defense, that's the room you need to live in, where we're not going to generate consistent stops by just being out there and running based defense. We need to be proactive and take things away and be aggressive and try and get stops by forcing a bad decision, forcing a turnover, putting people behind the chains. And so that was encouraging to see.
Yeah, well, and 5 sacks in the game.
Yeah.
It's one of those where also I think so much, or not so much, but at times this season, like Cincinnati comes to mind, where KU in the second half was like getting quarterback hurries. They were getting pressure, but they
Yep.
couldn't actually finish the job against Sorsby.
Yeah.
And man, Fafita is mobile. And
Yeah.
I thought that the gap discipline from KU's defense was really strong. Like the defensive tackles did a good job of, I think, getting some of that push and collapsing the pocket kind of north to south, while the defensive ends did a good job of keep setting the edge and maintaining the edge. Like Dak Brinkley's 2 sacks come because he is disciplined with his gap and where he's at. And then obviously, at the end of the first half, you get a defensive end dropping in coverage, which has been a topic that has been much discussed.
Yeah.
And Leroy Harris comes up with an incredible play. And it was one of those where it is a game-changing play. Just because the fact that it's a 14-point swing at the end of the first half. And first of all, his run is hilarious watching it back, because in real time, it looked like he was going in slow motion. I'm just like, how is nobody catching him? And I was watching the replays back, and I was like, oh, okay. Like the highlights on YouTube or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, he was moving pretty good.
Yeah.
But obviously that play comes back because of a hold. But again, I think just that the level of play from KU's defensive ends in this game was so strong. And I think it's one of those where, you're seeing a guy like Dak come through. And at one point in the game, he had more tackles for loss and sacks than Dean Miller on the season.
Yeah.
He may still have more sacks than Dean Miller on the season now. But seeing a young guy like that come through, right? I think this was a super encouraging game for KU in terms of the defensive line and the way it played. Now, there's still gap discipline issues with the linebackers, right? Where, there's the explosive run early in the second half. There's a couple times where they ripped off good runs, but defensively, like it was probably one of the more encouraging encouraging performances, just considering the fact that this is a good Arizona offense that has moved the ball. It moved the ball against BYU, moved the ball against Houston. Those are kind of two of the better teams they've played this year, and they've been able to move the ball. And so for KU to have some of those consistent stretches is positive. Now, obviously, they didn't do enough in the end, so that isn't good enough. But generally, it was a much more, I think, positive performance from the defense compared to what I was expecting on the sideline pregame, where I'm like, okay, how is the defense going to keep Arizona under 30? That was my thought. Not how is the defense going to keep Arizona, under 20 for most of the game until the final drive.
Yeah, Arizona right now, including this game, averaged 6 yards of play. In that first half, Arizona averaged 4.9 yards of play. So you're holding them a full, 1.1 yards of play below what they're used to. That dog will hunt. I mean, that'll work. And I think when you make good points about the defensive ends, it's something I've asked DK, right, at the press conference. I said, hey, what do you have to do to get more pass rush from your defensive ends? And I even asked it with the caveat, hey, we know part of your defense is dropping these guys at times and sending guys from different angles. But I think coming in, Swain, the defensive ends had like 1 sack since West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And, so to get multiple sacks from Dak, to get the pressure that they got from the defensive ends at multiple points in this game was really encouraging to see. Kansas had 9 sacks in 6 Big 12 games coming into this thing. And they wind up with 5 sacks against a very good offense. And like you said, a quarterback who can move in Fafita. And they did a really nice job of getting after him, and they created some turnover-worthy plays. I do want to ask you something, though. So did you go back and watch the game like the broadcast?
I can't watch the whole thing because some billionaires are pissed off at each other and can't figure it out. So
the reason I ask is, so on that play, which was a hold, I mean, Jalen Todd held. Like, he did.
Yeah. I did see that replay. Someone, I was walking to go to go throw some trash away after the play, and I was like, someone had like the thing up, and I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, it was a hold.
Yeah. So at halftime, the sideline person said Lance did not go into the locker room with the team and was instead staying out there and yelling at the officials that it was a game-changing call. And yes, it was a game-changing call. I'm not sure it's the best optics when you're leading at halftime for your coach to be yelling at the officials that it's a game-changing call.
Yeah, and the halftime radio interview that he did, I think expressed some of that frustration.
Yeah.
Where it was very much along the lines of, hey, our guys are competing their tails off out there, and we just got screwed, was kind of the gist of it. Granted, I think after he goes back and watches it, I think post game, I need to go check the quotes, but I believe he said that he hadn't seen the replay of it yet.
Yeah.
So that's one of those where I think whenever that chance does happen, I think he'll see like, okay, I understand why it was called. Because it's one of those where like, yeah, it's away from the play, do you like seeing it call, like all that stuff? At the end of the day, if you were to take a screen grab of that exact play and show it at an officiating meeting, they'd be like, yes, this is a hold. Like, you should call that. So, just don't hold it.
Jalen didn't help his case too, because he wasn't real smooth about it. Like, he grabbed, which happens, but then he didn't let go for multiple steps. And it's like, if you had just done like the quick tug, like every defensive back does that, and you can get away with that. If you have the prolonged hold after the tug, you're probably not getting away with it.
No, definitely not. And one more thing on the defensive ends, Kevin, Jalen Todd had 2 sacks, Dak 1.5, Tommy Dunn 1, DJ Withers half. So technically, the rest of the defensive end, it's for as well as Leroy Harris played, I felt like he hit Fafita 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And I was surprised to look back and see that he didn't have a sack after the game. And it's one of those where I also felt like, what do you think about this, Kevin? We were talking about this on the message board. It felt like KU's doing a lot more of the 4-2-5 stuff in the game, in a lot less of the 3D tackles, 2 DNs, the 5 front. It felt like it was a lot more of kind of the 4-2-5 that theoretically is KU's base defense. Did you notice that as well? Because that was something I felt like also maybe helped the pass rush a little bit, where it was one where the guys could just sit on the edge and just go, rather than having some of the the extra stuff that they're asked to do when KU's running kind of that 5 down front.
Yeah, I think that absolutely helps. And you look at who's been their best pass rusher in Big 12 play, has it probably been Blake Harrell? Like, when you go back and watch all the games and everything.
Yeah. So.
And Blake Harrell, technically, in some of those, 3-man, 5-man, whatever you want to call them, fronts, is playing more of a defensive end type spot, right? He's bounced out a little bit, and then you've got a defensive end lining up basically as a slot corner sometimes. And so, when that guy is rushing, you can get to the quarterback with a corner blitz coming off the slot, but you're usually talking about a kid that runs 4.4 or something coming off the slot. It's a little bit different when you're asking Leroy Harris, Dean Miller, et cetera, to get there from that far out. So I think that's part of it for sure. And where they're lined up and what they're doing, I think that absolutely helps. I also think they did a good job of confusing Arizona's defensive or offensive line about where they were coming from. And so even there were a couple times, I think the DJ Withers sack, if I remember right, was one where they sent several guys, and it was a traditional defensive lineman is the guy that gets through. And that's the thing, is a lot of people think when you blitz somebody, it's the blitzer that always comes free. That's not always the case. Sometimes it leads to somebody else coming free. And I think, Dak, I think, got one of his sacks that way, and DJ Withers got his half sack, I believe, the same way. And so I do think they did a nice job of confusing Arizona's offensive line about where guys were coming from too.
Yeah, I think so. Now, KU still, I think, had some, late in the game, you watch it and there's still some tackling issues, but in terms of broadly over the course of the game, it's pretty solid in terms of tackling. It wasn't one of those where, guys were flying all over the place and just blowing by people, because this is an Arizona team that would make you pay, right? With the speed they have at wide receiver. So yeah, I think overall, Kevin, it's one of those where defensively, like, you hold Arizona under 350 yards total, right? You hold them, under 6 yards per play. Like, you're checking all the boxes of what you needed to win the football game.
Yep.
And it's the offense that, again, just lays a complete egg in the second half. In the first half, I think the first two drives were a little, ugly for KU. Like the run on 3rd and 8 on the second drive, I think it was just, that was a head scratcher. Like that was asking to punt. But then in the first half, it felt like KU was at least scheming some stuff open after those first two drives.
Yep.
That we saw a little bit of triple option for a second, right? All of a sudden Bowden Gruen is wide open and Cam Pickett's open and guys were getting schemed open.
You see that. I mean, Emmanuel Henderson got open. That was a terrific throw by Jalen, by the way.
On the touchdown
in the corner. Yeah,
one of his best throws of the year, I think.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And I thought Jalen was solid in this one. I didn't think he was. I know the percentage was 51%. You pointed out he had 3 drops, all of which came, it felt like in key moments and were kind of drive killers. You had the incompletion where I don't know what it looked like in person. The broadcast wasn't great at showing it, but I know that somebody said on the radio that Keaton Kubeka was supposed to settle into the zone. Jalen kind of threw it to where he was supposed to settle, and he kept running, which is why that pass over the middle didn't look good. And then you had a Hail Mary incompletion in there. And I bring all that up because you take the 3 drops, the miscommunication, the Hail Mary thing. If you conservatively say, okay, we'll give him 30 more yards off of those, off of the 4 incompletions or whatever, then you have a guy who had over 300 yards of total offense and completed 68% of his passes. So it wasn't all on. I thought Jalen was solid. I didn't think he was great. I thought he was solid. But gosh, Swain, like, when is he going to tuck the football in key situations? Like, we know this is something that they work with these guys at. We go to all those practices in the spring through the off season. They start off with ball security every single day, right? It's they have a circuit and they go through it and they're taught how to tuck it. And it's not that Jalen doesn't know how to tuck it, but the number of times in a key moment that ball gets popped out is just off the charts. It's crazy to me. And they wound up recovering it, but even so, it was like, man, like, you just put the game at risk, and there was no reason to.
Yeah, well, I wonder if that contributes to why the official thought Jalen got hurt, right? Because he gets hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
And the ball comes out, and so maybe if you're an official, you're like, whoa, like, he get knocked out, or like, what happened? But yeah, I mean, he's got to take care of the football. Like, that's such a huge thing, and you can look through all the crucial moments and times, right? Last year against K-State, you can look at right against Cincinnati on the goal line, fumbling like that. Against K-State, getting lucky on that one. Like, it's just happened too many times. It's way too many times for as much as they practice it, right? Now, I think you're right about Jalen. I think overall it's a solid game, like a B. Perfectly fine. You can win with that performance, but you need other things to go your way, i.e. you need your wide receivers not to drop balls.
Yeah.
And I think there's still some times, though, Kevin, man, when I watch on 3rd down, I don't know what the reads are or what the thought process is. And I'll
yeah.
End of the 3rd quarter, right? I think it ends up being it's like a 4th and 5 or something like that. But right, 3rd down, medium, 3rd and short, end of 3rd quarter, and Jalen takes a deep shot to Emmanuel Henderson. Well, then K takes a delay of game to punt the ball. And granted, the analytics there, it's pretty even in terms of what you should do. But just, it's one of those where in terms of what is your plan on 3rd down? Are you planning to go on 4th down? Or are you saying, like, are you trying to get the conversion? Because if you're trying to get the conversion, I'd say, like, why aren't we trying to, why are we taking a deep shot? Right. Okay, then you got another one where it's to Bryson Canty in the flat. He's 7 yards away from the 1st down marker. And there's a defensive back bearing down on him. Bryson Canty's a physical guy. He's not necessarily your Cam Pickett make you miss. What are we doing here in terms of the thought process of that play? So there's just some times we're on 3rd downs, and this is a game where 3rd down was such a critical part of the second half.
Sure.
3 of 11 for Kansas.
After going 3 of 6 in the first half.
And it's one of those where I'm sitting there wondering, what is the thought process? What is the read progression on plays like this? And I don't know. Like, I don't have all 22. I don't have the playbook. I don't know. But it's just something I'm sitting there like, that doesn't look right on some of these big third downs. And that's how you go 3 of 11 in the second half when you need to put up more than 3 points. And that's the thing, Kevin. Consistently, this offense is doing nothing in the second half.
Yep.
You can go, think about it, really. Big 12 play for the most part, right? West Virginia, who cares? They suck. Cincinnati, right, was a good game for KU in the second half. They're able to put up points. But then you can go on the road at UCF. KU needed a strip sack fumble to score a touchdown in the second half. And if you want to argue they're backed up, sure. But that doesn't mean you can't do stuff with it and move the ball. Okay. You get Texas Tech, no touchdowns in the second half. You get K-State, no touchdowns in the second half. And you get Arizona, no touchdowns in the second half. You're not going to win many football games with that, Kevin.
That's true.
You're just not. So it's one of those where KU's offense, right, has been kind of the lighthouse for this team, right? Where it is the thing you look towards of like, they have to do it. And this year it's just not been the case, where this is going to be the worst offense KU's had since 2021. If you want to look at EPA per play, success rate, available yards percentage, really the three key metrics that decide like, hey, how good is your offense?
Yeah. People had a lot of issues with the offense a year ago, and that offense led the Big 12 in yards per play. And I think this year's offense is like more middle of the pack in the Big 12, I believe. Ninth, yeah. So yeah, when you look at it from that perspective, they haven't been able to count on the offense, and they really haven't been able to count on the offense in the second half. And I think if you poured some truth serum down Lance Leipold's throat, one of the things that he's kind of brought up a few times at press conferences is, hey, if it was the same issue every time, we'd fix it, right? Like we'd pull this guy, or we would change this part of it. It hasn't been. It's a receiver dropping a pass. It's Jalen being inaccurate or making a bad decision. It's an offensive lineman missing a block. It's a running back not choosing the right hole. Like it's something different seemingly every time. And if you want to make it even more holistic, it's the offense and the defense, right? Like defense will do well for a while, and then it's gap discipline. Well, okay, but then maybe we're in the right gaps, and you have a bad coverage decision. You wind up putting Austin Alexander out on an island with no safety help and press coverage. She did twice. I mean, like some of these things don't make a lot of sense, but they're widespread enough and in so many different areas that I'm not sure that there is just a super easy, hey, we've got the bye week, let's go fix it and we'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point, Kevin, too. And we could probably spurn this a little bit looking ahead now. Now we've covered, I think, most of the game. Do you have any final thoughts on the game before we look ahead?
No, somebody asked me if it was the most frustrating loss in the Leipold tenure. I would tend to point to K-State a year ago, especially with all the stuff that you have there with the streak and the fact that, hey, you're leading in Manhattan and you're in a spot to win that game late in the fourth quarter. So I would still point to that one, but I do get that if you took everything else out and just said, hey, these are two football teams playing, which loss is the most frustrating, that would certainly be up there because of, I think, the decision and then what happened.
Yeah. Honestly, to some degree, I might see like UNLV last year with the way that
I realized UNLV had a great year last year, but UNLV was not good in that game.
No, exactly. And that was one of those where you got the fumble bouncing, you've got the Kobe almost pick at the end of the half. Like that was a tough one. Yeah. And the offense went missing in the second half of that game too. Most frustrating. Yeah, it's top 3. It's the fact that, and this is the thing, Kevin, this is why I think I understand why fans are so frustrated. There are games that are just like this, that have the same script.
What?
Yeah,
West Virginia, you're up 11 with 6 minutes left. I mean, and then you wind up giving up a super quick touchdown while you're in prevent. Like, the whole point of prevent is it's supposed to make people take a while. And West Virginia gets the super quick touchdown. You run the ball the same way 3 times in a row, kick it back, and West Virginia gets the game-winning score. That'd have to be
but again,
there, I would think.
this is where I totally can relate to why there's just a throwing your hands up, like, come on, like, what's going, I get it. I really do. Because, again, it's the fact that we can sit here and really over the last 2 years. But again, hey, man, what about Texas Tech in 2023? There's just so many instances of this. And again, if you want to be Mr. Perspective, positivity spin, hey, man, Kansas is in a lot of games. And that wasn't the case 5 years ago. But again, now we're talking 5 years ago, though. And so I think you're allowed to move your expectations along a path as time goes on.
As time goes on, the head coach's salary goes up significantly in the level, and not just the head coach's salary, the level of investment in the program would maybe be a better way to put it.
Sure, and your quote unquote, and look, this is the return on investment is going to be how much money Kansas makes from this new stadium and all the premium suites and all that stuff.
Yeah,
because that's going to be very important as you get into this revenue sharing era. But at the end of the day, like, you're at the point now where, like, I can excuse some of like Texas Tech in 23. Like, I can talk you out of that, right? But the fact that we have 2 full seasons of Kansas football covering it and watching the same script, that's the part where I certainly relate to frustration. And look, like, Leipold's frustrated. I'm sure he's pissed the F off.
Yeah.
Right? He's not sitting there like, oh, these suckers, I'm taking their money. He wants to win. Like, he's won, a lot of games in his career. Like, this isn't something where people are sitting there, like, counting their money. And that's what makes, I think, the end of this season so important, Kevin, is KU has to get back to it. Well, we've talked about the bowl stuff. We don't need to do that conversation again. But what can Kansas control over the final 2 games to get themselves in a position to not be in the situation again?
That's a fair question, because I do think that Lance looks at himself, and I think that they look at the program after the season. I think you see that with how much emphasis they put on closing games this offseason, even though that hasn't necessarily something that they worked on a lot. And I think, there is an ability to look at on the interior. And so I don't know that it's something that, hey, it's going to change over the bye week or it's going to change the next 2 games. I do think that it's something that they're going to take a long look at after the season. And look, perspective-wise, this same stuff was being said about Mark Mangino, man. Like, the Arrowhead Stadium, where the offense was a no-show. Nick Reed, their guy who wound up being Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year that year, in the post-game presser, said that he wanted to fist fight the offense. Like, they had close losses in 05, and then in 06, they had even more of them. Their loss was garbage. Like, one of the worst programs in the Big 12, if not the worst program in the Big 12, and you lose a game like that. And they lost other close games. And so KU went 6-6 in Mangino's 5th season. Didn't go to a bowl because of the way the bowl stuff went back then. But there were conversations on the Fog at the time, like, man, we are really grateful to Mangino that we are not the laughing stock of the Big 12 anymore. We are obvious to take us to the next level. And yeah,
so the early 2000s.
Yeah, so it's funny because obviously I'm not saying, hey, KU's going to the Orange Bowl next year or KU's going to win 20 games over the next 2 years. But I do think, like, with that level of perspective, like, it was the same with Mangino, in that people were saying the same things after they went 6-6 in year 5, where it was, hey, good coach got us out of the basement. We're competitive now. We're losing way too many close games in bad ways at the end. Is this really the guy for us, or should we move on? And then obviously, Mangino was able to pull himself out of it. There's a question now of what happens from here. But I do think a level of, self-reflection, and I'm not saying for Lance, but for the KU program, looking inward and saying, hey, how can we turn 6-6 to 8-4, 9-3, etc.? Because they're right on that cut. Sound awful, but I don't even know that this year's team is that good. Like when we actually watch them play, and I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm just saying they don't do what do they hang their hat on? There's not something that they're consistently great at. And so when you look at it from that perspective and still say this is a team that had a chance at 9-3 this year,
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's when you look at it and say, okay, what do we have to do to turn 6-6 into 9-3, other than just, hey, let's up the talent in the program.
So here, all right. So I'm gonna do a translation. Really, Kevin, what you're saying is that Isaiah Marshall, Cole Ballard,
or David McComb.
That's what you're saying, right? Yeah. Okay. There you go. There you go. No, I understand, and that's something I think the tweet about this is just Kansas football. Look, that's more about that's what this iteration of Kansas is right now. Close game. It's just something where you look at it, and if you were to take, what is it? The last 14 losses, 9 of them, KU's hold the lead in the fourth quarter. Well, let's just say you get 4 of those wins. All of a sudden, you're 7-5 last year. You're 7-3 right now. It changes how everything goes, and obviously it's a results-oriented business, and that's what matters. But KU's close, and what can Kansas control over these final 2 games? You're not changing. At this point, the team is what the team is. I don't think you're going to see some massive changes coming out of the next bye week. I think it's going to be more about, like you said, Kevin, what's the identity of this team? What can you lean into? And I don't know, because the passing attack is inconsistent. Teams have found a way to really keep everything in front, really keep KU from scheming things open really deep down the field. KU does not have the offensive line to run the ball consistently. KU does not have the running backs to run the ball like it did with Devin, where you just hand it off and say, hey, man, go find a gap and go take it 75. You find consistency in the second half of these games. And then defensively, it's just a question of, golly, can you find a way to not have your cornerbacks have to cover for 5 seconds?
Yeah.
I think that those are the things that KU's going to have to lean into. Like Iowa State, I think that's going to be a game where you look at the pass rush and say, can you get Rocco sped up? Because Rocco's not had a great year. I've checked in a couple Iowa State games, and he's had some struggles. Can you get him sped up? And then defensively, look, against last year when KU played him, right? And KU had such a great game in that one. Can you take advantage of an Iowa State secondary that's playing kids that probably shouldn't be playing just because of the number of ACL injuries they've had? So this Iowa State game is it's the chance.
Yeah, it is.
BYU is good at the things that Kansas is not great at, right? Their defensive line really gets after the quarterback. They really do a good job of stopping the run. Offensively, they've got some good playmakers, maybe not the most consistent offense, but they got a good offensive line. And Dampier can certainly make you miss with his legs. So unless all of a sudden Utah just quits on Black Friday because they're like, screw this, we're not in the Big 12 title game, that's going to be a really hard game. And so I look at Iowa State and say, what are the things Kansas can control offensively? It's just finding some way to be a little bit more consistent. And then defensively, it's just, can you get a pass rush? That's what Kansas can control.
Yeah, if they come out and they defend like they did against Arizona, they'll have a chance. They will be there. And I think you look at the offense. There are times this year that the running game has been good. There have been times this year the passing game has been good. I don't know that they've overlapped where everything has clicked offensively, and you've said, okay, this is it. At least not against like a legitimate opponent. Like even West Virginia. Remember that was a game that Jalen was off.
Yeah.
And so West Virginia is what I look at maybe as their best performance against, sort of a legitimate opponent. I realize West Virginia's had a bad year, but I mean, not like a Wagner or somebody like that. But generally speaking, I don't know, and we're heading into game 11 now. I don't know that we've had a moment where we've said, this is Kansas football peak version of Kansas football that we've seen. And so that's the other thing that you're kind of chasing a little bit, right? Because if they do peak, then they should beat Iowa State. If they peak in that Iowa State game, if everything comes together, they should beat Iowa State.
Do you want me to give you a really depressing take?
Go for it.
I think the peak was West Virginia and Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Because you looked at those games, right? At least West Virginia, that was a complete performance. Granted, West Virginia stinks, but like that was a complete performance. And then Cincinnati, the defense was, had some big time struggles in the secondary, but in terms of offense doing its job, and like every game since, it has been at least one half of, I'm not going to say inept, but subpar performance, right? You can go through it, right? UCF, the defense stunk in the first half, the offense stunk in the second half. Texas Tech, both units stunk during periods of the game. Same thing with K-State, right? Oklahoma State, the defense was a sieve at times, and the offense, did what it needed to do. It scored on right every drive. But Arizona's not a complete performance, right? The defense didn't do it at the end, and the offense was inconsistent and didn't do much in the second half. Like, depending on how the season ends, Kevin, you would look back and say that the team had its best performance, peaked in week 4.
Yeah, and even then, again, it wasn't a firing on all cylinders peak. And so, and typically, I feel like everything kind of came together and looked really good for landslide bowl teams, and it hasn't happened yet this year. Like I said, you peak against Iowa State, you're going bowling. You're going to win that football game. You peak against Utah, you'll have a chance in that game. But at this point, you said earlier, we've been through 10 games. At this point, you kind of are what you are. And so I'm really hoping there's that extra gear in there, because, I mean, I'd love to see it, everybody peak. I'd love to see Jalen go out performance on senior day. I mean, we get to cover these guys, and we get to talk to them, and there are some great kids on this team that you want to see do well. It's just, at this point, do you have that in you to find that final performance, whether that's against Iowa State or against Utah?
Yeah, listen to Jalen talk after the game. Kind of asked him directly about, just the bowl game, and I think David, who's there with me, I think I asked him specifically, like, what would a bowl game mean? He said everything, because you've got a lot of guys that have been around the program, and then you've got a bunch of newcomers, right, that want to help K get back to a bowl game. And so I think we can eulogize, I don't know if that's the right word, some of those guys that after senior day, we're talking after Thanksgiving, but it's one of those where, look, this is a pivotal end of the year for Kansas. It really is, like, because it's going to define how this subsect, I think the last 3 years, are going to be viewed, because you've got kind of your 2021, 22 is like maybe its own thing. If you want to say 2021 is its own thing, 22 to 23, and then 24, if you want to go 2-year increment, that's totally cool to me. How you finish this year is going to define how this little period of the live poll there is going to be viewed.
Yeah, I agree.
And so they got to finish strong, and they got to figure it out. I feel like we've said that a bunch this year. But yeah, so it's going to make for an interesting, game coming off the bye week, because Iowa State is a bye week too, but I don't know if they're getting many of those guys back, because I think several of those secondary guys were season enders. So we'll have to see, but that's going to be a tough game, right? Iowa State, we'll get the kickoff time next weekend. Probably a night game just because that's how it seems to go when KU plays up at Iowa State. And so it'd be a tough environment, but it's one that, again, Kansas can most certainly go up to Ames and win. But again, we can't be sitting there the next Sunday talking about the same stuff we talked about, over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, if KU loses that game 24-21, there's a conservative play caller decision late in the game. You wind up losing a lead late, and you wind up being in a situation where the offense doesn't do a whole lot in the second half. Like that's going to be it. Like it's not like we're trying to run these guys down or anything like that. Like it's just that, hey, this has happened enough that at what point do things change? At what point is it an aggressive decision to go for it on 4th and 2 and you say, okay, like, hey, guys, go win the game on this one play? At what point does that happen? At what point does the offense have a second half where they put up 14 points in a close game and you wind up winning because the offense was so good in the second half? Remember in the UCF game even, the only touchdown they scored there was because of the strip fumble on the sack. So the offense has gone through a time period where they've really struggled in the second half. At what stop that they need to get? All of those things are things that you can change the narrative of in one game, really. I'm not saying people won't look back and say, oh, we should have won Arizona, oh, we should have won Cincinnati or whatever. But if that stuff fixes itself and you beat Iowa State to go to a bowl game, that changes the way this entire season is perceived. I think.
It does. It really does. Yeah, that's what I got for you. It can be fascinating. Last 2 games, a lot on line. So obviously we'll be there to cover it all. Make sure you're checking out Kevin's great work with KC Sports Network paid podcast, Verbal Commitment podcast. It's crazy to think we're also a month away from signing day, which has lost all of its juice with the transfer portal, which is sad. But so make sure you're staying tuned to Verbal Commitment. They'll talk plenty about recruiting for 2026 class in the state of Kansas and kind of KC as well. And obviously they'll talk a lot about the upcoming classes. Plenty of players are emerging in the state of Kansas for future classes. So make sure you're checking out Kevin and Ryan Wallace on the Verbal Commitment podcast. And make sure you're checking out Fog.net for all sorts of Kansas coverage, basketball, football, crossover season. I'm not sleeping much. We're working hard to bring you all sorts of Kansas coverage. So make sure you stay tuned to the website for all sorts of great insight from myself, Jack, and everyone on the network. Thanks always for listening to the Fog.net podcast.